All right. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming to the Northern Forest Bird Network webinar. I am so excited to share with you today the Camp Ripley team in Minnesota. I got to meet this team. If you were here early, Andy Forbes just chimed in about tagging wood thrush. So I helped Andy Forbes from the Fish and Wildlife Service tag wood thrush up at Camp Ripley. They bought 25 tags and we tagged 24 wood thrush who are now heading south. Super exciting project, but they also do so much more at Camp Ripley for conservation. And so I just wanted them to share with our team what they've got going on. So today we've got Josh Pennington, who is the Minnesota Departments of Military Affairs Environmental Program Supervisor. Josh supervises the Camp Ripley Conservation Program and provides oversight to the Camp Ripley Sentinel Landscape Program. And the Sentinel Landscape Program leverages partnerships to enable natural resource conservation and working lands protection with an 800,000 acre geography in central Minnesota. So huge area with tons of partnerships. I think our Northern Forest Bird Network just loves to hear stuff about this. And then we also have Andrew Herberg from the Minnesota DNR Camp Ripley Animal Survey Coordinator. Andrew coordinates the research, surveys, and management of wildlife populations, including state and federally listed threatened and endangered species at Department of Military Affairs properties throughout Minnesota. And I got the pleasure of helping with a blanding turtle with Andrew at Camp Ripley. And Katie Retke is also going to be presenting today a little bit about the Avian Knowledge Network, and she is their natural resource specialist. So thank you for being here. We're so excited you're taking the time to talk to our network, and take it away. I'll let you guys share your screen. Thanks.
Thank you very much. So we just wanted to say hi on camera, but we're going to turn the camera off. And Casey Molesky, kind of my new working partner, the animal survey specialist here at camp, she just came on board 3 weeks ago. So she's in the background too. We now finally have a bird person on staff. I am not a bird person by education or experience. So we're really excited to have Casey. So, all right, we'll jump in. We're going to share the screen here in a second.
Share that presentation screen.
Yep, it's in the background. All right, Jamie, can you see our
Yep.
presentation in the background? Perfect.
Looks good.
Jumping right here.
All right. Well, hello, everybody. So thank you so much for that introduction. I'm Josh Pennington, and I'm the Conservation Program Supervisor, Environmental Supervisor for Camp Ripley Training Center. And we're splitting this presentation up in the spirit of collaboration. We were kind of just having a conversation earlier about how much kind of a collaborative atmosphere we have here at the installation, and we're true to that form by even splitting up a presentation today. So
We should go quick down.
as soon as I can get the slides to advance,
There you go.
there we go.
Down and up.
So just an introduction for, what and where is Camp Ripley? So we are in the geographical center of the state. It's really difficult to get any more center than where we are. It is primarily a military training site. So we provide training for the federal component of the Minnesota Army National Guard and a lot of other states' National Guards. It provides training for everything from mechanized infantry to artillery, small arms ranges, a lot of different military training. And what's unique about Camp Ripley is that it's also a state-owned statutory game refuge. So you might think, if you're not familiar with military training activities, you might be curious on how is that compatible with a wildlife refuge. And the fact is that a lot of the training lands that we manage specifically for the military actually have a very strong benefit to natural resources and conservation benefits. And we'll explain some of that today. The other unique thing about Camp Ripley is that we're right on the convergence of ecological provinces. And so we've got a lot of unique habitat types here, from deciduous forest to prairie to conifers. And I'll show that in the slide. And then the other thing that we really value, and you can see in the background photo here, is the confluence of the Mississippi and Crow Wing rivers. We have 18 miles of Mississippi River shoreline and about 9 miles of Crow Wing River shoreline to the north. And with that confluence of those two river systems is a very unique in itself. So if you're familiar with ecological provinces at all, you know that mixed forest province to the north and the broadleaf forest is kind of that central band throughout Minnesota. And Camp Ripley lies right at the convergence. And then we've also have kind of a blend of that prairie parkland to the southwest. And so in the photo that I have here on the right, you can see the dark shaded colors, the two orange, that represents the land managed by Camp Ripley Training Center. That darker color is more of our forested, both a mix of deciduous and coniferous forests. And then that lighter yellow, lighter brown is what we refer to as more of our grassland prairie parcels. And there's a lot of mix in between there too. So there are a lot of forested parcels that have a grassland component in there. But for the most part, this is unfragmented forest. There's some large training complexes that are managed as a large grassland, but there is no real structural development within a lot of these areas. These are large unfragmented forested pieces. And then Jamie mentioned the Sentinel Landscape Program, and we're really fortunate to be recognized as a federal Sentinel landscape. There are just a handful of federally recognized landscapes throughout the entire country. They're all anchored by a military installation. But there are areas where the DoD has said we're going to partner with other federal, state agencies, municipalities, townships, counties to promote more conservation and agricultural work, primarily to prevent incompatible development from encroaching onto these military installations, or to promote more compatible land use types. And so we have done a lot of work within this Sentinel landscape. We have funded over 40,000 acres in conservation easements and some fee title acquisitions for things like wildlife management areas or green spaces along the riverways. We continue to work with NRCS and the SWCD, the Soil and Water Conservation District, Board of Water and Soil Resources on these programs. Just a lot of really great conservation work that's happening within this Sentinel landscape geography. And as we mentioned in the spirit of collaboration, this is a slide by no means it's all inclusive, but just some examples of some of the partnerships that that we work a lot with. And some of our program drivers. So why does the military proactively manage or why are they so involved in managing natural resources? And the first one obviously is from a regulatory perspective. Through the Endangered Species Act or Migratory Bird Act, Bald and Golden Eagle Act. These are all federal activities. And so there is that regulatory arm that requires the military to manage for certain species or for certain things. There's also a federal statute called the Sykes Act that requires all military bases to have an integrated natural resource management plan. And within that natural resource management plan, there has to be specific goals and objectives to ensure that the military is being good stewards, that they're not negatively impacting the training lands that they are entrusted with. And then in addition to that, there's a lot of state permitting, especially that since Camp Ripley is state-owned land, we have a lot of state laws and regulations that govern our work as well. But I would say what makes Ripley really special is going beyond just that regulatory framework and focusing on some of the active management that we do. We do a lot of prescribed fire on the installation. We do a lot of prescribed fire support within the Sentinel landscape. One of the things that we were just talking about earlier is our partnership with the Soil and Water Conservation District, Morrison SWCD, and we have a contract for service with the Forest Stewards Guild that we help financially support to help promote prescribed fire within the landscape around us. We host private land prescribed fire clinics on the installation where private landowners can come to the installation and learn about prescribed fire. And that service contract with the Forest Stewards Guild is they teach that course for us. And so they facilitate the private landowner course, and we take people to some of the sites that have either been burned or are planned to be burned to show them what prescribed fire looks like within a landscape and how it could benefit species diversity or forestry or other things. So our primary driver for fire is to ensure the military has these open areas. And so they have some training mission requirements where if they need a little small pocket of grassland, like you see in that bottom right photo, that doesn't have woody encroachment, we maintain those through fire. We also do a lot of our own seed harvesting out here. We harvest about 1,000 pounds of native seed every year, and we use that to further restoration goals throughout the installation. So just a lot of active management that we do. And then in the spirit of partnerships, a lot of the wildlife work that we do here is not something that is required of the installation or of Camp Ripley to do, but it's because our in-ramp is really driven with objectives that foster collaborative partnerships. So DNR, Fish and Wildlife Service, we talked about the wood thrush transmittering project. That was a perfect example of something that was a great collaborative partnership. Nothing that we're required to do, but it's something that says, hey, this is a value added, and we have the capacity and some funding to help support this. We have a great partnership with local colleges and universities. Central Lakes College out of Brainerd has a very robust program. The picture in the upper right is an image of some students putting up fisher den boxes to help them study whether or not artificial nest boxes are feasible for fisher. The picture on the upper left is a black bear telemetry project that has been a long-standing project with the Minnesota DNR. I think we have that project has been in place since 1991, looking at a lot of different components of black bears. The Nature Conservancy, and then Audubon. You see the Golden Eagle with the satellite transmitter in the bottom right. Andrew's going to talk to you a little bit more about that program, with just another example of a really great partnership. And I'm going to lead off with some of our forest management program. I think one of the things that enables a lot of our biological diversity is that active management that we're doing out here, whether it be a military-driven goal or whether it be an in-ramp objective of ours to maintain a certain native plant community. If it's a fire-dependent forest, for example, that you're seeing in that photo. So we have a very robust forest management plan, and within that plan has different goals and objectives based on the different management philosophies for that area. So, for example, the picture in the left is an area that we've identified for some type of timber harvest. In this case, it would be probably the thinning of aspen to promote more of a fire-dependent forest. And so a lot of these forested areas were not managed per the native plant communities for decades. And as about 15 years ago, we really started doing more management based on native plant community goals and transitioning these sites back into those traditional plant communities. And so a lot of that requires active harvesting, prescribed fire, and a lot of other management goals that support that. So that is the kind of the why we do what we do. And I'm going to hand it over now to Andrew Herberg to talk more about some of the direct wildlife work.
Thank you, Josh. I just wanted to add one last thing to his previous slide. So my previous role with DNR, I've been with DNR for 10 years now, was as one of the regional non-game wildlife specialists, and I dealt a lot with forest coordination. So coming here to camp and seeing how forest management is done has really been, a welcome surprise. Seeing some of these aspen stands get thinned, some gap harvest just to promote red-shouldered hawk habitat has been a welcome change. And so, yeah, really here, I just want to kind of give a taste to all the wonderful wildlife work that's currently being done at camp and has been done in the past. And so I'll just kind of give a very brief overview on a lot of different things. And then we'll dive a little bit more into red-headed woodpeckers, because that was what Jamie originally asked us to present on. So we don't just do bird work here at camp, right? We cover everything. It's a wide gamut. It may only be a few bullet points here, but we spent a ton of time doing herp work here at Camp Ripley. That really is my background. There was a lot of historical work, great work done here at camp that I'm hoping to continue. And so frog and toad surveys have been done here. These are auditory surveys that have been done since 1993. There's also been a ton of turtle work done since the 90s, mainly focused on Blanding's turtles. And that takes up a ton of my time, as well as our intern time every year. And so just to give you a little idea of the Blanding's work that's done at Camp Ripley, Brief background for folks who don't know, Blanding's turtles here in Minnesota, they're a threatened species. They've seen range-wide declines. They're currently under federal review this year. And so they're a long-lived species. 50 plus is not uncommon for this turtle species. We have a number of turtles here at Camp Ripley that are over the age of 40. They're also late maturing. Generally females don't lay their first clutch of eggs until 14 to 20 years of age. And that holds true here at camp. We generally see young unmarked turtles laying anywhere from age 15 to 20. And so a large amount of our time is spent doing nesting surveys during the month of June. These have been done annually since 2000. And so since 2002, we've protected 179 nests. And as you can see in the photo to the right, this involves caging. And this kind of gives you a feel for what does it look like actually on the roads here at camp. And you can see that our roads get graded a lot. But with these cages and the reflective poles, both military staff, roads and grounds crews, they know what to look out for. They're aware of all the work that gets done. And so you can see the grader has graded around this nest cage, which is wonderful. We have a pretty high success rate of hatching within these cages. And over 2,000 hatchings have come from these protected nests. And we're just starting to see potentially young females laying clutches that have possibly come from these protected nests. So we're going to start doing some genetic work to hopefully answer those questions, because that is the big underlying questions. Is we put in so much effort here. Is it truly working out? Are we seeing recruitment? And a lot of mark recapture work has been done since the early 90s. And as you can see, we encounter a lot of Blanding's turtles. Almost 1,000 turtles have been encountered since the early 90s. We're pushing close to 200 marked turtles, heavily skewed female due to these nesting surveys. We have a lot of recaptures, so ton of neat data. Just wanted to touch on this because we spent a lot of time doing Blanding's turtle work. And so we also have a wide variety of projects that relate to our mammal species here at camp. A fair amount of our time is spent doing bat work. We all know that bats are not doing well, especially our cave hibernating bats due to white nose syndrome. We've lost large portions of those populations here in Minnesota. Camp participated from 2014 to 2017 in a large scale statewide effort to better understand both movement patterns and hibernacular use of northern long-eared bats. And so I was a part of that project, but not on camp. And so camp has done great work to try to better understand the northern long-eared bat populations here. They've also been doing acoustic work since, I think the early 2000s as well. And likely bat work is going to continue and likely ramp up due to the potential listing of little brown bats and tricolors as well. As Josh mentioned, black bear work has been going on since 1991 here at camp. It's the second oldest study site in Minnesota behind the Chippewa National Forest. And what started as kind of looking at interactions of black bears and military soldiers has turned into much more, right? It is this large collaborative effort between DNR, the military, local colleges, etc. And right now, kind of the underlying questions that are being asked are, is the age of first reproduction changing? And we're at the southern edge of bear range, and what we're wondering is, are females having their first litter earlier? Gray wolves were first documented on camp in 1993. Since then, quite a bit of work has been done, including collaring, looking at pack dynamics and movements. We currently have 2 packs on camp. However, collaring work hasn't been done in a few years, and likely we're going to kind of ramp up some wolf work here in the next year or two to try to better understand these pack dynamics. As Josh mentioned, fisher work has been done over the years here, including some artificial denning work, as well as collaring and movement work, habitat use, etc. And this is a partnership with DNR and Central Lakes College as well. Quite a bit of work has been done with white-tailed deer, mainly looking at the impacts of white-tailed deer movement on the airfield. Um, and then quite a bit of work has been done, not in real recent years, but with looking at the small mammal community and specifically some of our rare small mammals. Kind of a hot button topic, I think everywhere is pollinators, right? Our invertebrate communities. And no different here at camp. We're doing quite a bit of invertebrate work. We're focused on monitoring monarch butterflies. We're fortunate to partner with the Monarch Joint Venture. They actually sent out student workers this year to help as well. We're monitoring bumblebees as part of the Bumblebee Watch program. Quite a bit of work has been done to document bee diversity in general here at camp over the last decade. And then we do work with tiger beetles. And more of that work actually occurs at one of our facilities down in the cities. But we do have rare populations of tiger beetles. We actually have the only existing population, known population of ghost tiger beetles down at our metro installation. And one thing that I'm not mentioning here, right, I'm just talking about survey and monitoring work, is that there is a ton of habitat work. You know, Josh talked on some of the habitat work that's done, but really Katie probably could speak to this if there are questions. There's a ton of habitat work being done related to pollinators here at camp. And so kind of touching on what I think you all are most interested in, there's a lot of avian work that gets done annually here at camp. And this probably doesn't cover all of it, but this will give you a taste. Breeding bird surveys have been done since 1991 on and off here at camp. So we have 90 permanent plots. Really hasn't been done. Our breeding bird surveys haven't been done in a couple years due to contracting issues. We had staff that felt they couldn't do it anymore due to hearing loss, etc. And I don't have the background and experience to be able to do these breeding bird surveys. But now we have Casey, so we are super excited to get back on track with our breeding bird surveys. Annually do Christmas bird counts. We do a lot of red-shouldered hawk work, which I have quite a bit of experience from my previous role at DNR. We do a more intensive monitoring of our red-shouldered hawk presence absence every 5 years. So we have 90 permanent plots. We do callback surveys on. We also do some annual monitoring related to forest management work as part of a larger DNR project. And the really cool thing about camp when I walked into this role, I'm new here as of last November, is that there's long-term monitoring data on almost everything, which is just phenomenal. So things like ospreys and bald eagles and trumpeter swans and loons and bluebirds and ruffed grouse, they've been monitoring populations here at camp for some of these species since the 90s, for others since the early 2000s, but quite a bit of work. And so for ospreys and kestrels, we have artificial nesting platforms. We put out 10 kestrel boxes starting in 2021. We've been fledging chicks every year from those boxes. We currently have 33 bluebird boxes that get monitored, just a wide variety. And so touching on our trumpeter swans were first documented in the I think in the mid 90s here at camp, but we didn't see successful reproduction until 2010. And so right now we monitor pairs of swans on 16 different wetlands here at camp. We see fledgling success from roughly a third to half of those. Josh mentioned, and Andy Forbes on this call, we're now part of a nationwide wood thrush effort, trying to better understand migration patterns of that species. Super excited to be part of that project. Glad we could. We really have a small role, right? Andy Forbes is bearing the brunt of this and did the vast majority of all the field work here. So we were happy just to take along with Andy. And then I think something that everyone's usually always interested in is we have a golden eagle project here at camp. And I'm going to touch a little bit more like I did on Blanding's turtles. So the kind of initial rationale for this golden eagle project is this was led by the National Eagle Center down in the Southeast, is just to try to better understand the habitat needs of Minnesota's wintering golden eagles. Also try to determine breeding origins and migration patterns for our overwintering population, as well as just educate the public. And so for here on camp, um, we got involved with this starting in 2015, but kind of the reason what kickstarted it was part of some of our wolf monitoring. We had roadkill deer baiting sites and remote cameras for monitoring our wolves. We started picking up golden eagles on those cameras in 2012. And so we partnered with the Eagle Center in Audubon and the DNR non-game program in Central Lakes College to try to join this golden eagle project. And so starting in 2015, we started baiting sites for golden eagles, captured Camp Ripley captured their first golden eagle in 2015. And since then, 4 other golden eagles have been deployed with solar satellite backpack transmitters. And so to use these, we've captured these with bow nets on these baited sites. And like I said, 5 eagles have been caught since 2015. Currently still have 2 transmitters on air. 4 of these birds have migrated north of the Arctic Circle to summering habitat in Nunavut territory. So they've gone over 1,600 miles between Camp Ripley and their summering habitat. And 1 eagle continues to summer in central Saskatchewan, traveling roughly 900 miles from camp. And so what we see is we see these birds show up roughly during deer rifle season, or sort of during our early November is when they seem to show up at camp. And then they seem to leave depending upon weather in that March, early April timeframe. And so moving forward with this project, we have a ton of awesome movement data, a lot of fine scale data, especially related here to their wintering movements. We need to analyze this data, try to better understand winter habitat use and maybe prey dynamics that are driving some of this habitat use. And then we're attempting to deploy 2 additional satellite transmitters this winter and beyond. And so I attempted it last winter. That was my first foray into trying to trap a golden eagle. And I can tell you it is not easy, especially in a winter with no snow. I learned that they just don't need to be at these bait sites, right? We did have 1 eagle come in. We saw this eagle a couple days in a row, but as soon as I started sitting in a blind, it never came back, of course. And hopefully, fingers crossed, we have more snow this winter, and maybe we'll have better luck getting another transmitter out this winter. And so I wanted to dive a little bit more into the status of red-headed woodpeckers here at Camp Ripley. And so this background photo actually was taken this spring. This gives you a little bit of an idea of what our impact areas look like. And so this was during the day that our southern impact area, Hendrickson impact area, was burned. And so this was a 3,000 acre burn, right? Sounds like a ton, but burn intensity in these impact areas varies greatly, right? Because we're not allowed to go into them for various reasons, including unexploded ordinances. And so it creates this really neat mosaic of habitat. And this is really where our red-headed woodpeckers seem to thrive on Camp Ripley. So a little bit of background. This isn't new to anyone here, I'm sure. But red-headed woodpeckers, they inhabit woodlands with relatively open canopies, and they seem to prefer a low density of understory vegetation, as well as they need sufficient dead trees and limbs for nesting cavities. Oaks seem to be preferred for nesting cavities. And then annual mass crop can influence seasonal movement. So winter migration patterns really can vary, right? We do see red-headed woodpeckers that stay and don't migrate at all here on camp, but I think that varies year to year based on mass crop. And that some of our red-headed woodpeckers here on camp leave camp and go just as far south as they really need to for resources. And this species is experiencing range-wide declines, mainly due to habitat degradation and loss. And so red-headed woodpeckers were first documented, or at least recorded at camp in the mid-90s during breeding bird surveys. Over the past 2 decades, incidental observations within and outside of breeding season have been recorded. I did do a quick dive into the data, and roughly about 108 observations kind of during some of those incidental observations were recorded. they seem to consistently occur within and near impact areas and ranges. And really, this is because those habitats here on camp really replicate kind of oak savanna habitats. These are created and maintained by military land use practices such as prescribed fire, like Josh was saying. And really, it's the fact that a lot of these areas have annual fire. That's what makes them unique. But because of this, it really kind of hinders our research abilities. Access is really limited, right? You have these large expanses of what we call really high quality red-headed woodpecker habitat within the impact areas, but we can't access them. And so the big question is, how the heck do you monitor our red-headed woodpecker populations if you can't actually get out to these areas? So that is our biggest struggle here. And I'll kind of go over some of the work that's been done, but we're also, all ears. We're looking for feedback and comments and thoughts of how best could we manage or monitor these populations, knowing that access is a real issue. And so just to give you a little idea on work that's been done in recent years, really it's trying to answer the question is, what is the status of our red-headed wood populations here on Camp Ripley? COVID-19 kind of gave us some opportunities that hadn't been available in the past. And so COVID-19 caused changes in military training schedules, which really gave us access issues, or access opportunities, not issues, sorry, during 2020 to 2022, really. And so not only can we not access the impact areas themselves, even getting access around these and impact areas and adjacent habitats is really difficult during late spring and through the heart of summer, just due to military training, right? A lot of these areas are closed, roads are closed, etc. And so kind of during this lull, previous staff, Brian Dirks and Nancy Dietz, they tried to design and assess the efficacy of using like a rapid survey method. So if you had one open day over the course of a month or maybe a couple of weeks that you could get around these impact areas, how could you get in and survey these areas rapidly, effectively, and cover sufficient ground? And so really they tried to conduct a baseline population survey using these methods. And so the survey methodology followed some survey guidelines that came from Wisconsin. Surveys occurred generally between late May and the end of June. Broadcast calls were utilized along transects with call points spaced 200 yards apart. I should have asterisks near these. This kind of did change year to year. And they used a 7-minute call series, which was kind of an alternating 7-minute series of silent observation, 30 seconds of call broadcasts, and then that repeated for 7 minutes. Calls were rotated 120 degrees between broadcasts, pretty similar to what's done for a lot of raptor species, etc. And so call points were visited once with multiple observers just to try to help with detection issues, right? We would love repeat visits to these call points, but like I said, we have so many access limitations. And then encounter data was recorded. And some of this data included, was it visual, auditory, age class, territory classification, compass bearing, estimated distance of the response, and then any sort of response behavior. And so in 2021, due to kind of access issues and I think testing the efficacy of timing and trying to avoid nesting disturbance, these surveys occurred a little later. So from late June through the beginning of August, 220 call points were surveyed, mainly around impact areas. And so this map here just gives you an idea of where were these call points in relation to an impact area. You realize that everything is shaded for that impact area you cannot get into, right? And some of the areas around the impact, some of these impact areas don't have roads adjacent, right? And this gives you an idea of, where we heard birds. Anywhere that was green, red-headed woodpeckers responded. Anywhere that's red, were no response. And so in 2021, they had call points with responses at about 57% of these call points. They determined 102 unique territories. I have air quotes around them because I struggle with how you define unique territories when you know you have responses probably overlapping um, from some of these call points. And they did record, like I said, the response distance. So I have a metric there of what was the mean response distance. And they did get responses all the way up to 550 yards estimated. I question whether or not truly you can really estimate a distance that far. Having done enough raptor surveys, once you get out past a couple hundred yards or meters, it's very difficult. And so in 2022, they repeated the effort. They tweaked the protocol a little bit. They went to a shorter call broadcast series because in 2021, they found that most responses were during the first or second call broadcast, and just trying to speed up it's kind of rapid survey. They went to a shorter, closer to I think it was a 5-minute series. 147 call points were surveyed. The reason less were surveyed is that instead of 200 yards between call points, they spread it out to 300 to try to minimize the same bird responding to consecutive call points. Ended up with 73% of the call points had responses in 2022. Estimated 118 unique territories. Once again, a metric about initial response distance. And these surveys did occur earlier in the year. And so in 2022, surveys were done between June 7th and July 7th. And so I know there is the potential for disturbance during that period. They also seem to be really responsive during that period. And so our plan here for future work is we're going to repeat the 2021 and 2022 efforts, but with modified protocols. We're going to kind of do a deep dive into the data and see what we can modify maybe to be a little more effective, a little more repeatable. We're also really hoping to monitor nest productivity adjacent to the impact areas. As you saw in those previous maps, they're not just in the impact areas, they're in some of the adjacent landscape because the habitat is similar. And thankfully, Casey, our new staff member, she's just finishing her master's, which looked at woodpecker habitat use, nest cavity use in northern Minnesota, looked at nest productivity, etc. So we're super excited. She comes from a woodpecker background, so she's got a lot of input here and really is interested in looking at monitoring nest productivity of red-headed woodpeckers on camp. We really want to try to better understand presence away from our impact areas. We know we have other areas on camp with really good suitable habitat. And we're interested in potentially trying to investigate seasonal movement patterns here at Camp Ripley, as well as monitoring forest health in relationship to frequent fires. So our frequent fires have created this amazing habitat, but we also know that oak recruitment is an issue in some of these areas. So trying to better monitor forest health is one of our objectives. But we're also looking for input and ideas. So we're going to kind of jump in at the end to some questions. If anyone's got thoughts on some of the red-headed woodpecker work, we'd love to hear it. We're familiar with all the work that's being done at Cedar Creek, and that's wonderful work. All the repeat visits, all the nest cavity monitoring, etc. We have so many limitations. We would love to follow some of that methodology, but access and ability to get in for repeat visits is one of our biggest struggles. All right, with that, I'm going to let Katie Rechka jump in and talk about the Avian Knowledge Network. Katie, let me know if you're having any struggles or if you want me to go ahead on slides.
That sounds great. Thanks, Andrew. And I hope everybody can hear me all right. I am working remotely today, so I'm not there at Camp Ripley with the team, but I'm just going to wrap up the presentation, talking a little bit and providing some background information about the Avian Knowledge Network. It's something that maybe some of you are already familiar with, but so in 2016, the federal agencies that included the Bureau of Land Management, Department of Defense, Forest Service, and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service all partnered together to develop a permanent archive to store aviofaunal surveys, inventories, and monitoring efforts. And, you can tell from Andrew's presentation when we talk about these long-term data sets where we have studies going on for 30 years and how technology has changed over that time, it's really important for us to be able to take that data and not only understand the trends that are occurring at our geography, but across geographies, particularly for bird conservation. And these federal agencies that partnered for the Federal Avian Data Center within the Avian Knowledge Network, they represent about 28% of federal land ownership in the United States. And Department of Defense oversees 26 million acres of land, of which, Camp Ripley is just this small geography. But how do we start to share that data and understand on a larger scale what can be done? So this was their solution for it. And so it's a clearinghouse for all different types of monitoring, research, and data that can help support decision management needs for regulatory requirements, environmental analyses, and planning. If you'd like to go ahead to the next slide. So that Federal Avian Data Center is one of 9 nodes that are housed within the Avian Knowledge Network. And Department of Defense has really been they've put out a directive for military installations to start entering their data, long-term data sets into this network so that it can become useful. And part of the outcome of that work has been identifying what they call mission-sensitive species. And they have identified over 15 species existing on DoD installations nationwide that should these become federally listed, they would have a significant impact on military installations. So this is one way for the Department of Defense to actually be proactive and start monitoring these species more closely when they do occur on those installation lands, so that they can develop best management practices and just better serve those populations. And then they also came up with an additional list of what they call tier 2 species that are not, they do not have the potential to currently be listed, but further on down the line. So of this list, there's about 50 birds that we're looking at closely to monitor their populations and trends. And then if you want to just advance to the next slide, Andrew. So the AKN tools are pretty robust, and they have several outward-facing, I would say, applications that you can use and look up information within nationwide within your geography. The data is shared at different levels for different agencies within each of those nodes. So what you're seeing is really dependent on a lot of different factors. But one of the great successes for Camp Ripley is that last year, we actually were able to upload over 3 decades worth of breeding bird survey data. That was approximately 18,000 records that we entered into this Avian Knowledge Network. And we can start utilizing with our partners and then also on our installation that will enhance our understanding of the trends and management opportunities for us. So that's really the high level what we do from here that I wanted to offer. And I think we're ready to wrap it up and go ahead and answer any questions that people might have.
Wow, thank you, everyone. This has been super informative. I didn't realize that huge list of avian bird list. Andrew, I was impressed. And I like this picture too. We did have a question from Dale Gentry. Is there any grazing that takes place on Camp Ripley lands?
Yeah, great question. I know there are a lot of DoD installations across the country that do have ag leases and grazing leases. We do not have any of those. So there's no grazing leases or agricultural leases on any of the lands that we manage. There has been some talk, not at Camp Ripley, but at the Arden Hills facility that is overwhelmed with buckthorn. We've been battling buckthorn unsuccessfully with herbicide treatments, and so
Yeah.
goats are an option, and we do have a deputy garrison commander that is all about goats, and so maybe we'll pursue a grazing contract for goats at Arden Hills, but not. Fortunately, we don't have any buckthorn issues at Ripley. We've been really proactive in keeping buckthorn out. I hope to keep it that way.
Is there an invasive species at Camp Ripley that you guys are that's really heavy there?
Yeah, absolutely. And so one of the things we do is we hire student workers from Central Lakes College every summer.
Mm.
Those student workers are in the early months of summer. They're with Andrew doing Blanding's turtle surveys. So they're patrolling the roads looking for turtle nests, and then in the ending weeks of summer months, they are battling invasive species. And three of the species that we predominantly deal with are tansy, common tansy, which if you're familiar with central and northern Minnesota, it's everywhere. And then spotted knapweed is really common as well. And then baby's breath is another common name for a species that we deal with. But spotted knapweed and common tansy, whether it comes in on vehicle tire tracks or disturbed areas, it's something that we're constantly dealing with.
Interesting. As people think of questions or thoughts, I had a couple. One of the I think Andrew shared that really cool photo of the prescribed burn. And did you say that was on an impact area? And if so, how do you do a prescribed burn on an impact area?
Yeah, great question. So a lot of our burn units are really small, right? And we do a variety of different management treatment styles. A lot of it requires stripping out, back burning, depending on the objectives of the fire. If we want low intensity fire, we'll let it back burn as much as we would and not put head fire across it. If we want less retention time and higher intensity. So for example, if we're trying to treat an area that is being overrun with hazel, hazel is a plant that can aggressively respond to fire and have the opposite effect of what you're trying to do. It might intensify the hazel, but high intensity fires are more effective at killing hazel. So we'll put a head fire on that unit. With impact areas, you're not given any of those options, right? Because there are no interior roads or no interior fire breaks. So really the only thing you can do is kind of ring the impact area with fire. And so we'll start with the opposite direction of the wind. That's a backing fire. And we'll put a backing fire on three sides of the impact area until we have a couple hundred meters of good black. So that'll probably take, it might take a full day to burn that unit. But we'll let that backing fire burn as long as we can, and then we'll start with the head fire and let the head fire grow into the impact or into the backing fire. The thing with that large impact area though is that you never get a full burned unit because of its size. You get that mosaic patch burn atmosphere. We are really interested in using some drone technology to monitor fire effects in the impact areas. Same reason why military, we're using Andrew's DNR computer today because one, DoD doesn't allow Zoom, and two, DoD doesn't trust us with having cameras on our laptops. We're also not trusted to have drones flying in the air. So right now we're not authorized to fly drones. But we're getting close. I think there are some opportunities that we're going to actually be able to use drone technology here in the coming years. And so then we'll be able to fly a drone over the fire and actually measure the effects of the fire in those impact areas. But hopefully that kind of answers your question. We do some aerial surveys with helicopter and planes, and we can kind of look down and see the effects of fire year to year. So the edges of the impact areas are getting burned thoroughly, but the interior, those impact areas, one impact area, for example, is 3,500 acres. So that's a big burn unit. And the reason we burn it every year, there's a variety of different training ammunition rounds that are fired into the impact areas. Smoke and obscurants are used, flares are used, tracer rounds, and within those native grass stands, if we don't burn it, it's going to create a wildfire. So we'd rather prescribe the fire and burn it in a controlled environment rather than wait for a wildfire to respond and then us have to respond to that.
Yeah, interesting challenges, but it seems that you guys are handling them really well, figuring it out.
Yeah.
I also was curious about, and if anybody else has any questions, please raise your hand or put it in the chat. This is kind of more of like a broad question, and I'm not sure if either of you could answer it, but what are the beginning steps of setting up a Sentinel landscape? I live near Fort McCoy, and I know they don't have that set up, or maybe they do, and I just don't know about it, but I'm curious, what are those beginning steps on the building that collaboration?
Yeah, another great question. And you're right, Fort McCoy does not have a Sentinel landscape program, although they have a really robust conservation program. If you're
Hmm.
familiar with McCoy,
Hmm.
um, they do a lot of really great work. They've done a lot of butterfly work, surveys, but I think it's the Regal Fritillary that exists on Fort McCoy.
Hmm.
But so some of the first steps in becoming a Sentinel landscape program, there is a federal coordinating committee made up
Hmm.
with representatives from Fish and Wildlife Service, Department of Interior, NRCS, the Department of Ag, and then DoD officials. And then so those three departments really look at where can they have the maximum extent of prioritizing resources that has the greater value. So if Fish and Wildlife Service has priorities in a certain landscape, um, such as I'll provide an example of um, in the southeast United States where red-cockaded woodpeckers are prevalent and that long leaf pine ecosystem. So Fish and Wildlife Service has some really high priority areas that they want to emphasize. And so they'll push for Sentinel landscape designation in some of those landscapes where those are drivers.
Mm.
Here, it was kind of a mixture. For us to get federally recognized, it was a mixture of all three, but really, um, it was I would say one of the reasons that we were designated as a Sentinel landscape is because of the ability and demonstrative ability of conservation execution at a local level. So we have state and SWCDs that are doing a great job, where federal funds through like things like NRCS's RCPP program have been really valuable. We've done some healthy forest reserve program, forested easements through that program. We've done a lot of conservation actions, forest stewardship plans, prescribed fire with private landowners. Um, so they saw the value in that, and they said this is really opportunities where DoD, Fish and Wildlife Service, and NRCS and Forest Service could actually benefit from seeing that local level execution replicated at other sites. And so that
Mm.
was kind of one of the drivers, I think, for us getting designated.
Yeah.
But any one of those three agencies, if they carry a lot of weight for prioritization of resources, they could probably
Yeah.
promote. So I don't know
Interesting.
about Wisconsin. We always tease Wisconsin. So I could say some things, but I'll withhold.
It's all good. I live right on the border, so I try to be Switzerland.
There you go.
Christian Nelson had a good question. I'll read it from the chat, and Christian, feel free to jump on the mic too if you have more thoughts. But some of those impact areas have very large areas of oak savanna that are pretty unique to that specific area, with repeated annual burns and an inability to access the sites for planting. And as the oaks age and senesce, they will likely decrease and disappear. Those areas will then be large fields rather than savannas. Is there a long-term strategy to maintain oaks in those areas?
That is a great question and a very true point. And so one of the things I could put Katie on the spot to answer this one, but we are looking at the long-term fire effects, vegetative fire effects, and so we attended a DoD sponsored fire effects monitoring training just this past December, and they're uh, looking at some long-term studies, enabling some, the beginning of some long-term studies looking at those fire effects. And so we do have some monitoring plots we're going to be launching later this summer to kind of study some of those fire effects. And then we are looking at innovative ways to reduce that oak savanna, or to prevent that oak savanna from becoming just a prairie or a grassland. Uh,
Mhm.
as I mentioned, these fires are not always 100% like burned out, right? And so there are areas that we do have some oak regeneration occurring. One of the southern impact areas, for example, if we were to provide a photo of it, there is quite a bit of regen that's occurring, and oak has it's kind of hardy to fire. So if you have a really low fire intensity, a lot of those younger those oaks can survive low intensity prescribed
Mhm.
fire. So other areas get burned that are more intense, it's not going to have the same result. And as those oaks age and die off, uh, that could be there could be an impact to red-headed woodpecker habitat if we start seeing the die off of some of these nesting cavity trees, or not dying off, but just wind damage, wind issues, other things where the oaks are completely gone.
Well, and as Josh mentioned earlier about forest management here on camp, and I think that dynamic is really unique. And that, if it was a great question, and if we do see that, right, if we really truly think our oak savanna is going to disappear from these impact areas, then maybe it's up to us to be proactive and adjacent habitat to these impact areas to promote oak savanna, right? More active management, more thinnings, maybe putting prescribed fire adjacent to some of these impact areas on a less frequent basis to try to promote that habitat. But yeah, all things we're thinking of, or at least trying to.
Yeah, I would say within that 3,000 acre block, if you're able to fly over that, it really is a mosaic. And I would say there is quite a bit of oak regeneration occurring within there because the fire intensity just doesn't. There's a lot of wetlands within that 3,000 acre impact area that serve as a fire barrier, where fire just doesn't really carry through it, right? And so there are a lot of areas that are just not really getting fire. Year to year, it might differ. We don't do any type of aerial ignitions, where some installations they want, like some of the bigger Air Force bases where they do aerial gunnery. They want to see like prescribed fire really effective throughout the entire impact area because they don't want to start a wildfire from within.
Yeah.
We don't have that here at Ripley. We don't do any type of aerial ignition. So the only ignitions we do are on the perimeter, which causes that really enhanced mosaic pattern.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of our fire pyro guys that, we've got a pretty robust team. We have 3 RXB2 wildland fire burn bosses on the installation. We can call them our fire geeks. They would love to do aerial ignitions, but we just don't have the need for it.
I don't know anyone that does fire that is not a fire geek.
Yeah, it's kind of hard not to, right?
Yeah,
It's easy to get into.
exactly. Great. We got time for one more question. Oh, here Christian had a thought. Maybe water bombing drones that can keep burn intensities low in certain areas for several years in a row until the oaks are large enough. Water bombing drone is a thing. Not sure about that, but
No, but I tell you what, we do provide all of the training for the Minnesota DNR and the Minnesota Army National Guard's water bucket training for wildland fire response. So anytime
yeah.
you see a helicopter carrying a water bucket, putting it on a wildfire, they receive all their training here at Ripley. We actually go and light test fires for them, and they go put them out. So that's
Cool.
definitely a possibility
Mm-hmm.
of timing the water bucket training to the times that we're doing the impact areas. Maybe we should have the conversation with the aviation folks and time
Mm-hmm.
that.
Neat. Any last questions? We got one more minute.
Well, I did not think we were going to be able to take up the entire hour, so I rolled it off.
It was a great presentation. I just am so thankful I got to meet you all when I was up there taking wood thrush. And hopefully I'll get a presentation on that later this year or a blog. But thank you so much for taking the time to give an overview to our network on all of the projects you're doing with wildlife and conservation in relation to Camp Ripley. I really appreciate it. So thank you. And thanks
Thank
for
you.
everyone attending and asking questions.
Yep. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. September, we have a boreal research project from Madison, so I'll send that out later this month. Have a great day, everybody.